Sorry folks, your politicians lied to you. There is no gun show loophole this week on Mail Call Mondays. This is Mail Call Mondays, the show that answers your questions about precision rifles, optics, and equipment. I'm your host, John McQuay. Now, there's been a lot in the news lately about the gun show loophole, and we're going to talk about it real quick. This week, the Senate is debating over new legislation that's supposed to close the gun show loophole. And you know, so I got my quote fingers on, and that's because I don't know if our politicians just don't understand what goes on between private party firearms transfers, they're ignorant, or they're just intentionally misleading you. Let me start off by reading a quote from our esteemed Vice President, that's right, crazy Uncle Joe Biden, from the U.S. Conference of Mayors on January 17th. I quote, "That's why we need, and I've recommended to the President, universal background checks. Studies show that up to 40% of the people, and there's no, let me be honest with you again, which I'll get to in a moment, because of the lack of federal agencies to be able to even keep records, we can't say with absolute certainty what I'm about to say is correct." Let me stop right here for a minute. This is basically political doublespeak saying that I'm about to tell you something, but if I'm wrong, it's not my fault. So now we'll continue with the Vice President's quote. "But the consensus is about 40% of the people who buy guns today do so outside of the NICS, National Instant Criminal Background Check system, outside the background check system." Okay, somewhere in that convoluted statement, what he's basically attempting to tell you is that today, meaning in this current climate, that 40% of the people that buy firearms buy them without going through an instant criminal background check as required by law when you purchase a firearm from a licensed federal firearms dealer. Now, let's break this down and take a look at this real quick, because I've heard this 40% over and over and over again. Where are we getting this figure? Where are these 40% of people coming from? Well, judging by our Vice President's statement, you would seem to believe that the federal government has recently done a study on this, or some gun control advocacy group has recently done a study on this. It might surprise you to know that the study that he is quoting is actually the 1997 Institute of Justice report written by Philip Cook, and we'll leave the link down in the description below. And basically, what this covered was a survey of 251 participants. That's right, 251 people. Those 251 people were the sample group that now is supposed to encompass the entire U.S. population. Out of these 251 participants, they were queried about their firearms purchases between 1993 and 1994. So the President is telling you facts about right now, but he is referencing a study that was done in 1997 that covered 1993 through 1994 purchases of 251 people. Does that sound like an intentional misleading to you? It does to me. Now, if we delve into this wonderful 40% study a little bit deeper, we're going to see a couple of other issues. First of all, out of the 251 participants, actually 35.7% said that they didn't or probably didn't obtain a gun from a licensed firearms dealer. The probably didn't is because they couldn't remember at the time where it was that they got that firearm from. So those were automatically lumped into the didn't category. Now, the 35.7, you'll notice right off the bat, is a little bit lower, in fact, significantly lower than the 40% that was quoted. So where do we get this 40%? Well, the 40% comes because the study had a plus or minus error of 6%. So instead of stating that it could have been a range of results, Of course, the advocates for gun control just took the top number, the 40%. So it could be even lower than that. So it could have been rounded to 30%. They decided not to do that. So we're seeing some dishonesty here. Now, out of that group, the 251 participants that were polled, 9.3 of those stated that they received that firearm as a gift. So going into this 40% number, 9.3 received that as a gift. They didn't purchase it underhanded. They didn't purchase it in a back alley. They weren't trying to avoid any laws. It was given to them as a gift or as a result of winning a contest. Now, out of that, the entire study, only 3.9% of those purchases, 3.9% of this inflated 40%, were purchased at gun shows. So how do we then call this a gun show loophole? It's just dishonesty at its greatest. Now, we run into a bunch of problems with this. The first and foremost being that the study was done prior to the current NICS checks. It was done prior to the instant check that you do in a gun shop now. So we've already taken steps to make sure that guns are only being sold to proper individuals. Now, of course, I have a problem with the entire premise of this legislation because we're not enforcing the current legislation. An individual who knows that they're disqualified from purchasing a firearm can go into a gun shop, lie on the form, then through the NICS check can be denied due to lying on the form, and they can walk right out of the gun store scot-free. If charges are filed against them, it's a real big if on if those are actually going to be picked up by the federal government. And this happens routinely. People are denied because they lie on the forms and no prosecution is followed up. So why do we need more laws on top of that? Well, let's take a little bit deeper look into what's going on here. Now, Johns Hopkins Center for Gun Policy and Research, they're getting ready to release another study or another book, and they cited a 2004 survey of incarcerated inmates. These are people who have committed crimes, who should be disqualified from purchasing firearms. And they asked them, hey, where'd you get your guns from? Well, only 11% of those actually purchased their guns from licensed gun dealers. Friends or family accounted for 39.5% of those firearms. The street, which to me is a broad topic, the street category accounted for 37.5% of those firearms. Stolen guns are 9.9%. Now, because I deal with this on a regular basis, I'll break that down for you quite a bit. If your gun is stolen and you don't know the serial number for that gun and you're not able to give that to the police and put that on the police report, then when a criminal commits a crime with your gun and your gun is recovered as part of the investigation of that crime, that doesn't go into the stolen gun category because that gun was not in fact reported stolen. It was stolen, it just wasn't reported stolen. So bear that in mind when you see the 9.9% of stolen gun figures. Very often police reports are taken on stolen firearms that no serial number is given, so that gun can't in fact be reported stolen. Now, finally, gun shows / flea markets account for 1.7% of firearms that were obtained by criminals. 1.7%. That kind of is a little bit in contrast to the 40% figure that we keep hearing. Now, you also need to bear in mind when you listen to these figures that I've just quoted that some of these criminals, in fact, I don't have any estimate on how many of these criminals that were polled were not criminals at the time that they purchased the firearm, because in fact you have to commit some kind of act to then become disqualified from purchasing a firearm. So they were not they may not have been disqualified at the time they purchased the firearm, but then later committed an act that would have disqualified them from purchasing it. So we have to bear that in mind too, that they may have properly acquired the firearm. And I would venture a wild guess to say that probably leads a lot into that 11% figure. So I would encourage you, we'll leave links for this study, of course, down in the description below. I encourage you to go take a look at that as well and make your own decisions based upon the figures. But we just like to hear these politicians keep throwing these broad figures around, and no one cares to drill down and see actually where these are coming from. Now, those are the figures, those are the studies that are floating around out there. The unfortunate thing is the federal government doesn't like to fund studies like this, so that's why you really haven't seen a detailed study since 1997. Looking into it, there are a bunch of individuals who have attempted to gain grants from the federal government to continue to study this and have been denied. So that's why we're working off of old data. Now let's talk a little bit more in depth about what they're attempting to refer to by this thing called a gun show loophole. Well, when you go to a gun show, there's generally two classes of people who are selling firearms there. You have licensed firearms dealers and you have private individuals. Licensed firearms dealers, even at a gun show, are required to do an instant background check on you before they hand you the firearm and let you walk out the door. So it's no different buying a firearm at a gun show from a licensed dealer than it is buying from them in their own shop. Now the other side of it is the private individual. Now the private individual can buy or sell firearms at a gun show without any paperwork whatsoever, without any instant background checks. But they can do the same thing at their house, at a fraternal organization, in a Walmart parking lot, wherever they feel like. So this is the kind of sensationalism I'm talking about. We like to use gun show loophole because it's something that sticks in your head and it's a soundbite the media can get. But there's no difference in these transactions than what goes on every day in a gun shop or every day between private individuals. So it's just another way to try to distract you from what's really going on and throw up a nifty phrase for you to toss around. Now, who is the legislation that they're proposing going to affect? It's not going to affect the gun store owner, because he still is required by the ATF to keep track of every firearm that he sells. He's required to do an instant background check on every firearm that he sells, and he's required to retain the paperwork from that transaction in his possession until he surrenders his license. It's not going to affect him at all. He's already doing the background checks. Who it's going to affect is you and I. It's going to entangle our ability to transfer our private property to other private citizens. If I decide that I want to sell my firearm to another law-abiding citizen, currently I can do a face-to-face transaction and I don't have to get the federal government involved. Now, obviously, because I'm a responsible individual, I'm going to take every step that I can take to make sure that that person is a proper person that should have a firearm. If I get there and I talk to them and there's some bells and whistles going on, or like I like to do, take down their driver's license information and make sure I have a record of who I'm selling this to. If they're kind of hinky about that, then maybe we don't want to go that route. So it's private responsibility. Now, let me play devil's advocate here for a moment, and I'm sure what's going to happen is you get legislators that say, well, wait a minute. Since there's no oversight, the government isn't making sure that you're doing what you're supposed to be doing, then criminals can buy and sell firearms wherever and whenever they please. I got news for you. They already do. And a NICS check is not going to stop them. Criminals, when they transfer firearms between themselves, are not going to stop and say, hey man, we've got to go down to the gun shop and you've got to get a background check before I sell this gun to you for a dime bag. It's just not going to happen. So again, we're coming up with new legislation that's going to hinder your ability and my ability, but it's not going to affect criminals in any way, shape, or form. Criminals already purchase firearms through straw purchases, send people that they know are legit to go purchase a firearm for them. And no amount of background checks will prevent that. No amount of background checks will prevent guys from going into a back alley behind a crack house and buying and selling firearms. They're already breaking the law. They're not going to follow a new law. So, no matter what kind of carrot the politicians try to dangle in front of you or how reasonable they try to make the laws sound, laws are not going to be followed by criminals. The only thing they're going to do is affect law-abiding citizens like you and I who worry about our reputations, worry about our houses, our jobs. We'll follow the law because if we don't follow the law, we can lose everything. Criminals don't follow the law because they're criminals. They generally don't have anything to lose. So I encourage you, please, while the Senate is debating this new legislation, make it a point to read the legislation, read the fine print in it. When they quote studies, make sure you go look up the study and look at the figures on those studies and see if they're legit or if they're overstating them or if they're quoting something that is decades old. And make your own decision. Then contact your politician and let them know that if they screw you over, they'll be without a job next term. Please, these are your rights. It's your responsibility to defend them. This has been kind of a long-winded and possibly slightly uninteresting show for those of you who are my outside the U.S. viewers, my worldwide viewers, and for that I apologize. I know some of you guys, though, are very interested in the political climate here in the U.S. and what's going on with us, and for that I thank you. For the rest of you, my U.S. viewers, please don't let this slide. Make sure you are following every bit of this legislation as it makes its way through the Senate, and if it passes the Senate, make sure we kill it in the House. It has got to die. It cannot go on. They're going to try to tag all kinds of extra stuff on this, and we have to be vigilant. We have to be on our toes. So make sure you're talking to your politicians. Send them letters, call them, email them, whatever you have to do. That's all for our show this week. If you've liked this show, please make sure you give me a thumbs up. If you want to comment, leave a comment in the comment section below or send it to us on Facebook or Twitter. If you're a subscriber, thank you very much. If you're not, please subscribe. And until next week, get out and shoot!